Hey, good to see you. Thanks for coming. This is another episode of Wireframe, and today we're going to be talking about aesthetic naming and how much I dislike it. Right, so I kind of alluded that I was going to talk about something that Nathan Curtis wrote recently, actually, according to the Medium article, a day ago. So, very recent news, so to speak, here, and I have strong opinions about the overall kind of direction. But we'll get into that in a minute. In terms of news-related stuff, I want to thank the community. I had a couple of folks reach out to me about the book editing problem that I've been having. And I have a couple of options from there. I've been following up on those, and those are looking pretty good. Additionally, I was actually received a kind of an urgent, emergency course that I have to teach because the facilitator is unavailable. So in Parsons, they have a course for usability testing, and I got to take that over for the next couple of weeks for those students. So that'll be exciting. And a couple other things, of course, that are going on. I've actually got a little fire under my butt because Josh Harwood, who you might know is the partner that we had with Design System Events, he has a site called Design System Media, which all the videos end up on, and he also now has a podcast section over there, and Wireframe is on the podcast section, except that it's the old Wireframe that I was doing last year on that section, which only has 11 episodes. So that has kind of motivated me a little bit to make what we're doing here on YouTube a little bit more podcast-like. So I did some research into figuring out how to take these episodes and turn them into a proper podcast. And then, of course, with that motivation, I also will most likely update the wireframe.fm site to support this new format because I'm really confident in YouTube's ability to maintain this media in this way. And as well as, of course, the other MP3 version of this stuff that I will eventually be creating, which I actually found a nice platform that's able to take a playlist of stuff on YouTube and convert it into a podcast. So I'm really looking forward to trying that out and seeing if it works with what we've created so far, which is going to be great. Because otherwise, if it's more manual, I kind of don't want to do it. So, such as having the ability to code things in, the year 2025 where everything is automated and immediate, which, by the way, has been really great for the shorts. That's a lot of the folks that have subscribed, I believe, have been coming from the shorts that have been across YouTube and Instagram. And now, recently, I connected the LinkedIn there so you could see my face. As long as you're following the Design Systems House channel, I'm not putting my face on my personal page yet because I know that's probably going to be a little bit more annoying than I want it to be. So I want to have people have the option of just following Design System House and seeing it there if they want. All right, so those are pieces of news and bits and bobs there. Let's get into the actual topic, which is this blog post that Nathan Curtis, who I think many people know in the design systems practice, that he was a big figurehead and led the charge in a lot of these things. So I want to show this post up here, and it's called Purposeful versus Aesthetic Naming. And the subtitle here says, favoring semantics isn't always ideal, and blending both is worse. And I will agree with the latter half of that, that blending both is definitely really bad. But favoring semantics isn't always ideal. That's the thing that I'm really going to pick apart, unfortunately. I really like the story, though, that he has here, and I'm just going to read it out here just in case, again, this ends up being an audio and you're just kind of, driving along the highway listening to me babble it along. But this is the story that he introduces. He says, our design system effort was gaining momentum, and we reached a crossroads that he'd seen coming a mile away. So he says, so your most important brand color is red, I asked, meaning Nathan. And the person says, yes, they replied calmly. And then Nathan asks, then what color will we use for errors? And then they said, red, very decisively. And he goes, the same red? And they say, yes. And then Nathan says, okay, got it. In mockups everywhere, I also see that red used to distinguish the sale price. So we communicate things that are on sale with that red too, and they also say yes. And then Nathan asks again, okay, to be sure, imagine I'm designing a product that's on sale, and the user configures an invalid quantity. In that tight proximity, the UI will signal three things: brand, sale, and error, all with the same red, and they say yes. What a story, right? And I know exactly this kind of mentality, right? I've seen things like this a lot, where people just, take the brand, take the, the error state, and they're both red, and like, what do you do? The sale price is really kind of crazy for me, just because negative usually does mean decrease, but not necessarily for the sale. Like, would expect sale to be like a green kind of thing, like, hey, this is a thing that you want, so we're going to raise this up as a success. Granted, again, green versus the brand versus the sale, that could be like confusing, certainly. Although I think sale and green being the brand color might align a little bit better. But overall, I think red is a very strong color overall, so I think it's really hard for a company like Target, for example, to support a red as their brand, but also support it for cases like errors and cases like sales, right? So definitely a really tricky problem, certainly, to solve in terms of how to convey that stuff. You definitely need a lot more accessories to signify what those things are meant to be, where it's brand, where it's a sale, and where it ends up being something critical to pay attention to. But I definitely sympathize with what Nathan's talking about in here. But I want to continue down the page, because there is a part in this that I want to highlight. He goes into purposeful options. These are what I would also call intents, typically, not in the way that there are for tokens, but they would be aligning kind of with those tokens a little bit. So we've heard of things like success and warning, and of course the other ones like info and new, and even potentially error. And even what we see here, I would say, is also mixing a lot of things up. Let me go back to me for a second, because I want to bring in a little bit of my research into all of this. Because when I did the research for Mizison mode, one of the things that I landed on was this idea of priority, and what we're trying to convey to the user as important versus something that's not so important. And when we think about something that's, very important to the user, that's something that's very critical, you need to pay attention to that first. And then there's other messaging that's maybe not so critical. And then there's messaging that's, just like, hey, it would be nice to know. And one of the things that I was exploring was the possibility of taking what is effectively kind of showing these kinds of ideas of feedback as levels of priority. Like, hey, this message is important, this message is not as important, et cetera, et cetera. And what I landed on instead, especially when it came to UI expression, is that these actually make more sense as modes. And if you've seen the Mizison mode presentation, or maybe even the website, it does kind of have this quote that I really loved when I made it up, which was, there's no such thing as a critical button, only a button inside of a critical mode. And what does that mean? Well, in your system, you may have something that's like a button that's specifically for destructive actions and double confirmation stuff that's usually like a red. But that button is usually in the context of something that is wholly critical, right? Something that you really need to convey to the user, like, hey, there's something you got to stop, pay attention, this is really important before you move on. So the entire area is actually critical. So instead of thinking about only the button being in this critical state, the entire area is in a critical state, and therefore we can apply a mode to that whole area to convey critical. So placing the button into that mode would then convey the idea of critical by values changing because of that concept and that expression. So what I landed on is that the idea of success and error and even all the other things that are listed in here, new, warning, info, those could be expressions of an existing scope and message. So in my mind, I actually think these are really a selection of modes, which is going to be very unique to what many other folks are looking at this as, because they're going to probably look at this most likely as variants or maybe as tokens. But in reality, for me, I think of these things as modes, right? So that's a scoped area in this section that's like an error state. Then he goes on and talks about aesthetic options. And the aesthetic options are basically saying, what color is this, right? It doesn't have any reason behind choosing that color other than I want this color. So that's the aesthetic option. And he explains a couple of reasons why aesthetic could be used. And I'm going to list them out because I really don't think that you should be using them all. But here's a couple of things that he says here. He says, serving different needs and contexts. One of them is visual control and flexibility. Designers may need flexible control over an appearance that doesn't map neatly to semantics. Sometimes you need a light-gray divider. Forcing semantic meaning feels artificial. Okay, so with this point in particular, what that means to me, if it doesn't map neatly to semantics, means to me that the designer has no idea why they want to add that color in that place. Okay, light-gray divider. Well, light-gray divider for me ends up just being like a border that's part of the box kind of definition, right? So when you are dividing things, there is a semantic meaning saying, I am trying to divide pieces of content. We do that with borders all the time. So light-gray divider, that ends up in the same family to me. So when I want to divide pieces of content, that's going to be supported by this intention through color. So I don't think that is a valid reason to just avoid semantics. The next thing is decorative use. Some components serve purely visual roles where structural meaning is secondary, irrelevant, or not yet defined. Woof. If something is on the page, it should be important in some way, right? When we're talking about decorative use, there is still the possibility of saying that this thing is here for a reason. Like when I think of decorations, I think of like icons that are meant to like provide more context into something, right? So that happens a lot of the times. I think decorative use really maybe even goes on top of the illustration parts, right? So regions of illustration, and then of course you think, oh, that can't be semantic. Well, it actually can. Not in the same way that we would normally think of UI elements being semantic, but there is a scalable way of thinking about illustration and the regions that you might color than just picking this is red and this is blue. There's a little bit more that can go into that. One of these days I'll sit down and explain what my thinking is behind that. But admittedly, this, I think, is the closest thing that I can think of that's like, I need this red. That could be a potential reason, but even still, I do also believe that it might not be. So, on the fence for number 2 here. Migration and legacy support. When retrofitting design systems onto existing products, aesthetic props can ease the transition by matching appearances that already exist. This sounds like tech debt to me, right? For me, if I'm in a place that I need to improve something, I want to improve it immediately. And I know that there's places where like we're going to do things incrementally, and in places that we can't do it yet, we'll put in this value. But here's the thing, if you are moving from a system that is hard-coded into one that includes tokens, I don't believe that there's any benefit really to going from, okay, hard-coded to aesthetic token value, which is effectively the same thing as what you had before, just now it's a variable, to what is going to be a new named variable there. So you're going to be doing 2 steps instead of just the 1 step that goes from the hard code to the correct semantic value. So unless there's like some other scenario that I'm not aware of in here, talking about the retrofitting stuff on existing products, Again, I think that it's better to go right to the semantic thing because admittedly, like I said in a couple of episodes before, the semantics shouldn't change. A button will continue to always be a button, right? A form element will continue to always be a form element. And in the event that you think that it's better for it to change the semantics and change the reason why it's there between themes, there's something wrong, something that needs to be improved. And the final thing he has here is coverage over semantic gaps. Sometimes semantics simply don't exist yet, or the use case is too specific to warrant a semantic abstraction. Well, the first part of that makes me feel like a person hasn't really thought about why it exists, right? And I understand that 100%. Like, folks that are starting out in this kind of industry, in this practice, they can get overwhelmed and not have a good stance on why they made a decision or not, right? They're just kind of looking at other things out there and saying, oh, I want to do this, let's do that, and not really understanding why those things are happening. But I think a lot of the more senior people are going to look at this and go, well, there's always something that exists that explains why it's there, right? Or there should. And if there isn't, we should really reflect on why. But the second part here is that the use case is too specific to warrant a semantic abstraction. So that guy goes into like the decorative use situation. And the reason why I'm thinking of decorative use is specifically for illustrations, for things like data visualizations, syntax highlighting in code, even like avatar groups, you know, without the images in there. Like all of those things are in the same group within my way of thinking, which is less semantic, but still in a scalable way that fits in the system, kind of, sort of, almost, maybe. Again, something that I really need to like put more effort into explaining that like exception to. I hate saying exception to it, but it is an exception because it's not the same as the rest of the system that I hold dear. But overall, I do think aesthetic naming is wrong. Like, it shouldn't be part of your toolkit. I believe that there is a better way to handle practically anything. And admittedly, I would love examples of places where aesthetic naming actually needs to happen. I have a great deal of confidence that I have an alternative direction that supports the possibility of being semantic. However, that does come with overhead, which is potentially what's going on here, right? I do know that teams, organizations are in different levels of maturity when it comes to systems. I think of the perfect world all the time as a North Star for teams to actually get to. But if you just allow for people to not go to the North Star and be okay with like just being here on Earth and, you know, doing it like this other team did over here, or in this, you know, this workshop that happened over there, and that's okay for you, okay, I guess, but I feel like we have the opportunity to be better, potentially. So that's why I like to promote new ways of thinking. It's the same thing as the responsive design stuff that I was talking about yesterday, right? Like, we used to make 2 sites. That's the way that we used to just do it. But there's a way to improve, but it takes a lot of effort and a new way of thinking to improve, right? So that's my argument in the aesthetic naming. I do think that there's better ways of going about it. So now this screen that I'm showing here is talking about the comparative examples across these visual properties. And if you're not able to see this, again, looking at the post here, there's 2 basically columns, and one column is purpose, the other column is aesthetics, and then he has some examples of badge, text input, card, and text. So I'll just explain maybe a few of them. That in the badge purpose area, there's options for error, success, and default. Meanwhile, for the badge aesthetics area, the same kind of selections, you have red, green, and gray. So what he's kind of explaining here is that if you were going to set up your badge with the idea of selecting a variant by purpose, you would have error, success, and default. However, if you were setting up your badge for the purpose of only aesthetics, you would have options like red, green, and gray. Okay. Now, again, this is the thing that's super important here, is that the concept of a thing being in an error state, specifically being red, may change. That could be a cultural thing. That could be even a brand thing where something, gets conflicted. We need to convey it in some other way. So like, you really don't want to just blindly map the idea of something being an error state to red, because that could change over time. There's more examples on here with the, like text input card and text, but I'm trying to see if there's one that's actually very good in here that really shows the idea. I think let's try the text input one. So text input, the purpose has options like standard, contained, and minimal, while the aesthetics have options like outlined, filled, and underlined. Now, I would actually argue that the standard, contained, and minimal, those sound more like densities to me than like purposes. And that one in particular is very interesting. I'll bring it back to me for a second because I want to like do a little bit more Mizison mode related stuff. When I was doing the research for Mizison mode, one of the things that I realized, especially when it came to that priority idea, is that the concept of a control or a form input doesn't have priority inherently. What does that mean? Well, if you look at any particular interface, there isn't an idea of a primary form field, like the form field that you're meant to interact with that's different from another form field, unless it's in like this destructive pattern. But again, that area in which that input is in is providing the context of it being important, not the input itself. It's not the same way as saying like you have a destructive action, you have an OK and cancel button, and you need to fill out, here's the repo name that I'm going to be deleting. The buttons need to convey different priorities between the one that's going to be the thing that's going to actually delete the repo versus the one that's going to cancel you deleting the repo, right? So those have separate priorities about which one's more important or which one's going to take a higher precedence. But the form that's inside of it, that's going to be effectively the same within the context of that kind of critical area. So in the system that I promote, most other categories like text and surface and action, they all have levels of priority, basically saying this kind of thing is more important, or primary and secondary, etc., than other things of the same category. But the category of control does not. It's just control. So what it sounds like the purpose of text input for this image is trying to describe is more like the density, basically saying here's a smaller input, but here's a more like bulkier input. And that in my system also is handled separately entirely. But the thing that I think is a little bit strange in this kind of one-to-one example is that in the text input aesthetics, there we go, the options that are here are outlined, filled, and underlined. And I guess that's what the treatment would have been for those things, where like the outlined one is the standard, and then the filled one, I guess, is like the background is filled, it's contained, and then the underlined one for the text input is like its look of it. But I think this is a little contrived, admittedly. I mean, I understand trying to like get it to one, but yeah, I think both of those end up being more aesthetic than they're purposeful. Because again, if there's an input on the page, the expectation is, well, this is how inputs look for us. So we can identify as a user, this is a place I need to type. If these things were presented differently across the experience, it would be really hard for a user to know, can I type in here or not? I mean, material design came out with that research after doing the floating action label, identifying that, hey, users actually didn't know they could type in this stuff because it was just an underlined. So we've already kind of went through that exercise of, hey, we need form fields where we're looking for user data to be consistent in a particular experience. On top of which, we even have a expected look and feel, and when we deviate from that, you're going to get less people going into that system with confidence, right? So if we have these options, it's a little bit I guess, adds a little bit more friction. So, just going through the rest of this thing here. So, later on, he describes the blending approaches thing that has basically the ideas of doing purpose up first, which is like, hey, please choose the purposeful ones first, but also has what is effectively escape hatches on the bottom. And I really don't like escape hatches. And I also kind of believe a little bit that escape hatches are there because of the need for speed, the need for not having the ability to communicate why something's there or why I've made this decision, but I just want red or I just want green, right? And in order for the green to just be there, we're going to let you just put the green there. And I just don't think that's the right play. I think we could do better than that personally. And I don't want to accept that that's a direction that we should allow. Again, from a consistency standpoint, from a meeting user expectations standpoint, and admittedly from an expression standpoint, there's another direction that we could take to allow people to get the red that they're looking for. It just takes a little bit more effort, unfortunately, right, for the people who are looking for that. Yeah. So he mentions about escape hatches as well that allow for those things to occur in there, talking about the idea of exposing deprecation messages that say, okay, what's going on? The possibility of doing multiple properties, so basically having a variant that kind of says what's the purpose, but also having a color that says, hey, you know, I want red, green, and blue. And then when you have things that conflict, what actually wins, right? In my opinion, the variant, of course, always wins, or the purpose should always win if you're going to have this. But again, I think that's poor planning, admittedly. So yeah, I just look, I understand in the real world where people are trying to push out products and push out designs and make MVPs and all that kind of stuff, right? Choosing a color from a list real quick and without having to justify that choice is something that has to happen in the real world, right? I recognize that I'm speaking in a world that is meant to be perfectly strategized, right? But the reality is that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? If the culture wants to not support the decisions with purpose and only have it through feeling, they don't have the resources in order to support a different way of working, then this is what happens, right? And this is how tech debt normally happens, right? We have decisions that we've made earlier that we come across months, years later, and we realize, oh, we should have done this a different way. But even if we come across those things years later, that's when like we might not even have the resources to address it. So we're stuck for more months and more years later until it becomes a real problem. And I really truly believe that token bloat is a real problem that can be solved, but it's not solved, in my opinion, by avoiding semantics and allowing for aesthetic naming. I really do think that anyone who sits down and really understands why is this color being added here, why is this font being added here, why is this change required at all, understanding that really unlocks the ability to make those changes when you do need them. Rebrands happen all the time, new expressions need to happen all the time, and semantics really support that stuff. But I do know, again, how hard it is to justify the purpose behind that stuff in a way that everyone can understand, in a simple way. But yeah, I don't, like I said, I don't agree with the allowance that the article's necessarily providing, but I do understand that it's grounded in reality. So, not to say, again, I think Nathan is brilliant when it comes to design systems. He has a metric ton of experience with different organizations and teams, working with them and seeing what those teams are doing. So a huge amount of respect and props that I give to him for exposing this stuff to the community in such a clear manner in terms of what's really going on out there. Again, I'm not saying that that what he's written is bad, because what he's written is good. It's explaining exactly what's going out there in teams. I'm just saying that what teams are doing is wrong. That's all I'm really saying. Or really, I should say, what teams are doing can be improved. And in order to do that, you just have to think differently. And that's all I'll have to say about that. Anyway, if you have some opinions otherwise about this, if you disagree with me, anything like that, please feel free to leave those opinions in the comments down below and play nice in there. We're going to also take a look at some other stuff that's going on this week. I mentioned that tomorrow I will be at Vercel here in New York City. I was here 2 years ago when they were announcing some changes to V0 back then. I'm kind of hoping that I see some more V0 stuff this conference tomorrow, especially when it comes to kind of integrating your own design system into those components. I think that would be really great. Another thing that's happening this week is, I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago or a couple of shows ago, but Brad Frost will be on The Question for episode 56, and they're going to be talking about something that is near and dear to my heart. It's not necessarily design tokens, it's everything. it's all the things organization. So Brad has an article that discusses this concept, and it's basically saying all the multiple things or facets that we need to kind of have a say about, I guess, or architect when it comes to an organization that's a product or a brand and all that kind of stuff. And admittedly, I would put white labeling and multi-brand in the same kind of thing, or maybe sub-brand personally, but overall, I think this is going to be a really good session. It is on Friday. I'm going to try to make it on Friday as well, because I think this is going to be a really excellent conversation to be a part of if you are in the space of multi-brand, multi-theme, which I very much am. And that should really basically do it for this show. Thanks so much for joining, and I'll see you in the next one, which will be hopefully maybe later this week, or maybe next week. Maybe I'll take some time off. Who knows? Do I need some time off? It's hot outside. Maybe I'll stay inside and do another show. Who knows? Anyway, see ya.